Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege of Parshas Kedoshim. And I want to draw your attention to what I think is a fascinating detail in the Parsha. The Torah says as follows, Parak Yud Zayin Pasuk Gimel, chapter 17, verse 3. The Torah says as follows, Ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shar al kesef ha'iz b'machane, o asher yishchat michutz lamachane. If a person will offer up a sacrificial animal, a carbon, but where does he offer it up? In the machane, in the camp, or outside of the machane? Outside of the camp. What doesn't he do? Ve'al Pesach o al moy lo heviu lahakriv carbon l'Hashem l'fnei mishkan Hashem. He offered up a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he offered it up outside of the precincts of the Mishkan, later on in the Beis HaMikdash. So he failed to bring the carbon to the Mishkan. What's the halacha? Dam yechashev la'ishahu. It's almost considered to be like a bloodshed. Dam shafach, he spilled blood. V'nichras ha'ishahu mikarav amo. And such a person will be cut off from the Jewish nation. Kares. So a fascinating halacha, fascinating mitzvah. This is what's called in halacha shchutei chutz. I'm offering up a carbon to Hashem. Remember, this is not an idolatrous sacrifice. I'm offering this up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The difference just is whereas I'm supposed to bring it to the confines of the Mishkan or later on to the Beis HaMikdash, I offer this up in my backyard or somewhere else. It doesn't really matter where. What matters more is where it's not. It's not in the Mishkan. It's not in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Torah says if you do this, it's a very serious transgression. And if you do that, it's ki'ilu. It's as if a person has shed blood. And the punishment for this is spiritual excommunication, kares, one of the most severe penalties we have. And of course, on the most basic level, what is the Torah sensitizing us to? Here you think about this, the guy, we'll call him Ruvain, right? The guy in this pasuk, he's trying to do good. He's trying to offer up a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like I said, this isn't idolatrous. This is service of God. Torah is teaching us service of God has to take place in a framework. Yiddishkeit is a box. Now, Baruch Hashem, the box is very big. It's much bigger than we ever think. You know, Acharei, we just came off of Pesach, and in Pesach, remember again, we have the Daled Banim, the Chacham, the Drasha, the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, the one who doesn't know how to ask. They're all part of Klal Yisrael, right? They're all at the Pesach Seder. The Haggadah addresses, Torah addresses each of them to tell you what, there's a big box that could accommodate a lot of people. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us so many different avenues of spiritual connection. So some connect through learning Torah, some connect through chesed, through tzedakah, through tefillah, through prayer. All of us have different avenues of connection. But the avenues of connection have to exist within a framework. If there's not a framework, if there's not a box, and if there's not some level of rigidity to the framework, and everyone does whatever they want, then that fundamentally erodes at the fabric of the covenantal relationship. Then before I know it, I'm doing whatever I want, but whatever I want is not what God wants. So suddenly, again, there's no longer service of God, there's service of the self. And no longer does my Judaism serve as a bridge between myself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, myself and my fellow Jew, but rather, again, it's only a mechanism of self-advancement that really is influenced by whatever the popular societal trends or isms that are present. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says the box is big. The framework is so large, but there has to be a framework. There's a way to offer up a carbon. And the way to offer up a carbon ultimately, again, is in the precincts of the Mishkan, in the precincts of the Beis HaMikdash. Much in the same way, there is a way to observe Shabbos. There is a way to observe Kashrus. There is a way to observe Taharas HaMishpacha. These are halachas. There's a framework. Of course, they're machloksim, there are details, different, but there's a framework, there's a box. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying the box is big, the framework is large, but you have to put yourself into it, because otherwise, there's no covenantal, lasting relationship. But I saw a beautiful insight by the Sakhachever Rebbe. And the Rebbe says something outstandingly beautiful. He writes, he says, Iker tachlis hakarbanos. He says, what is the point of a carbon? Right? In general, we know God doesn't need my animals, right? God doesn't need my stuff. So what is the point of a carbon? Lehisragel lemesiras hanefesh. So beautiful. He says, the entire essence of a carbon is to habituate ourselves in the process of self-sacrifice. Right? When you give a carbon, what are you doing? You're taking something that belongs to you, right? It could be an animal, or it could be anything else, right? Flour, different types of carbonos. You take something that belongs to you, and you sacrifice it, and you give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A carbon is the way we habituate ourselves to the process of self-sacrifice, because life is filled with sacrifices. You know, often sacrifice is a bad word. We don't want to have to sacrifice. Someone recently told me, I want to have my cake and eat it too, and then have some more left over afterwards. So we don't like the idea of sacrifice, but the truth is life is filled with sacrifices. A person decides to eat fleischiks. I decide to have a steak for dinner. I'm sacrificing ice cream for dessert. I probably should sacrifice the ice cream for dessert regardless. But lamaisa, life is still, whenever you choose A, by definition, you're sacrificing B. That's just the way life works. Everyday life is filled with dramatic or I should say undramatic and maybe unimportant sacrifices. But then life is also filled with dramatic and important sacrifices. And says Acharei Rebbe, the entire essence of a carbon is to teach us the concept of mesiras nefesh, the concept that you have to learn to sacrifice. But he says something amazing. He says, but in life you have to learn how to make the right sacrifices. In other words, it's not just enough to sacrifice, but there are sacrifices that should be made, and there are sacrifices that shouldn't be made. He goes on, he says, makriv adam karban shelo b'makom haroi. If you make unworthy sacrifices, hainu, shemoser es nafsho al dvarim she'einem b'misgeres haTorah. So you make sacrifices, but for things that are unimportant, or maybe for things that even run contrary to our ideology, meaning your sacrifice does not bring you al Pesach o el Moed, to the entranceway of the Mishkan, to the entranceway of the Beis HaMikdash, to the entranceway of Kedusha closer to God, then at the end of the day, dam shafach. Dam shafach means you've wasted your energy. Dam, blood, represents the very life force of man. Kilomar, mesiras hanefesh lo b'makom mitzvah, hishvichos damim greda. Sacrifice that doesn't yield any type of spiritual gain, a sacrifice that doesn't bring you closer to God, a sacrifice that doesn't bring you to the entranceway of the Mishkan, to the Beis HaMikdash, that's ultimately, again, shvichos damim. You're wasting energy, you're wasting time. And a person who lives like that, v'nichras hane'esha hu mikarav amo, it's not a punishment. It's almost like a reaction or a result. It's a de facto statement. If you make the wrong sacrifices in life, you cut yourself off from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is such, I think, an incredible yesod to contemplate. So just in general to think about, we all sacrifice things every day. You could think about something as simple as a person sometimes, just a simple example, I'll leave davening early in the morning to get to work. Now, sometimes you have to leave davening early in the morning because you just have to. But I wonder, is that the right sacrifice? So I'm leaving davening early to get to work because at the end of the day, I gotta get, I have stuff I have to do. So I'm sacrificing time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to get to the office. Now, obviously, again, to be clear, sometimes we have circumstances beyond our control. Sometimes, again, that's just the way life is. But some of us do have control. I have control when to schedule that meeting. Or I have control about whether or not the extra 15, 20 minutes in the morning actually makes a difference. Again, obviously, sometimes I have to get home for carpool. Sometimes I have to take care of my kids. There are things I have to do. And again, I want to be clear. Sometimes there are circumstances beyond my control. But sometimes we proactively make the sacrifice. No, I'm going to get started. I want to get an earlier start. Okay, so just understand, you're sacrificing tefillah. In other words, I might get my whole davening done, but I'm sacrificing time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to get to the office. I just have to think about whether or not that's the right sacrifice to make. Or sometimes there are activities that I want to engage in, but I know that they don't happen in the right atmosphere, or they don't happen in the right. So again, but it's something I really want to do. But just understand, if you really do it, whatever the it is, I'm giving up, I'm sacrificing things from within myself for this. So maybe the sacrifice is worth it, maybe it's not worth it, but it's something to be contemplative of. And I think, something I've been thinking about over the last couple of days in a very acute fashion. We've seen the overwhelming eruption of anti-Semitism on college campuses in a dramatic and overwhelming way. This is not about pro-Palestinian. And these what we see, these encampments, this is not about support for people who are undergoing difficult times. This is rabid anti-Semitism. And to call it anything else is simply delusional. It is an opportunity to vent Jew hatred. and it is an opportunity to go at, anti-Semitism, if you think about it, it's kind of been a little bit stunted over the years. You had to be careful after the Holocaust, and you had to be a little bit more careful. You had to be a little bit more guarded, because there was a certain sense of almost like global guilt over what happened. So it's been a while since there's been a good deluge of anti-Semitism. It's been a while since there's been like some really good, juicy Jew hatred for the world. The world is taking advantage of it. The opportunity came in Gaza. No one really cares about the Gazans. No one really cares about the Palestinian people. If they did, there are so many things you could do to help people if you're really concerned about helping. And camping out on college campuses does absolutely nothing for the plight of the Palestinian people, because it's not about them. It's about hatred for us. And dear friends, a lot of Jewish parents, still now and certainly throughout the years, have prided themselves on pushing their children to Ivy League schools. And the amount of sacrifice that goes into that. There's a financial sacrifice. Tuition is not cheap. Sometimes, again, parents even think about, what high school do I want to send my kid to? Maybe there's something that's a little better on the Yiddishkeit side, but they're not going to have the academics. They're not going to have this. Not going to get into Ivy League schools. Right? And now maybe my kid falls in love with Torah and I want them to learn a little bit longer. But you can't defer the Ivy League enrollment too long. However, maybe we have to start thinking about the sacrifices we make. And maybe we're making the wrong sacrifices. When the world rejects us, which is exactly what is happening now, and when these very institutions that Jews throughout the years have patronized are rejecting us, maybe it's just time to go ahead and recalibrate the sacrifices we're making. And again, I want to be clear, all for higher education. Why don't you go to college? If one is capable of getting a graduate degree and doing something with it, not just for the purpose of getting degrees, but doing something with it, absolutely, make a difference in the world. Maybe we just have to be careful and really think about where we do it and not be blind, because many families have made tremendous sacrifices to advance their children through this. Maybe it's just time to think about and recalibrate a little bit about the type of sacrifices we make. And in general, how many of us make sacrifices in order to fit in to greater society? Well, greater society, or at least segments of greater society, are showing their true colors. We just have to rethink a little bit about the corners we cut in our Yiddishkeit and the sacrifices we make in our Yiddishkeit in order to fit in. Are those sacrifices really worth it? Are those the right kind of sacrifices to make? Just something for us to contemplate. Again, I'm not advocating for a retreat from the world. No, we stand our ground. We're not running. We're not running anymore. We did that for 2,000 years. We ran. We don't have to run anymore. We stand our ground. We keep our head held high. And no matter what the world throws at us, we've seen it, we've lived through it, we've survived it, we've thrived through it, we've been victorious over it. It's nothing to worry about. But maybe it's just an incredible opportunity just to rethink the sacrifices we're making. So on a personal level, we always make sacrifices every day. Are the sacrifices we're making bringing us closer to Hashem, bringing us closer to the Mishkan, bringing us closer to the Mikdash, or are they chas v'shalom distancing us? And the sacrifices we make as an organized community, are they bringing us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to one another, or is distancing us? It's nice to think you don't have to make sacrifices, but each and every day we must. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the strength and the wisdom to make the correct, the beautiful, the necessary, and the holy sacrifices. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos.